I'm now going to invite our panelists to respond, and to start off, I do have one question. I should note that among the panelists, we have curators, academics, journalists, so you'll be getting different views. Do you want to make a response, Shirley? Well, I'd like to start with Yan-Chi, and the question is, I think Christine has showed us that there's a complexity to this issue that's maybe more than any of us even imagined. We've probably all just gone around talking about Asian design or Asian art or Asian culture without really realizing how difficult a term this is and how many interpretations there are. So the question I'd like to ask the panelists is, for you, this term Asian design as complicated as it might appear to be, or do you have a much clearer sense of what one might mean if we talk about Asian design?
Yes, I have to respond to Christine's speech. And okay, in the beginning of Christine's speech, he asked three questions: what is design, what is history, and what is Asian design? And all along her speech, I find that how she has defined design as, a process of making pleasurable, interesting, or cultural things for a time of peace. But yes, I have published a book which is called The Birth of Modern Design in China. So for this book, I have to construct a very, since I'm a Hong Kong Chinese, if I have to say something about China, I have to be very conscious. And so for, for the first job I have to do is to construct a very vigorous conceptual framework for every word that appear in the title of my book, that is Birth, Modern Design in China. So the period I have written about this piece of history is from 1842 to 1949. And actually, from 1842 to 1949, to a Chinese who is historically conscious, we see that the year 1842, 1895, 1911, 1914, 1937 to 1945, and 1949 is some significant year for the Chinese history. So when we want to write something on design in this period of time, I have to be very conscious about the social and the political change of the whole historical complex, and I have to relate these very, turbulent years in the Chinese history with the development of design. And how I have to, I call it the birth of modern design. I try to relate the practice of design with this, all these turbulent political situations. So we see that, to make it brief for introducing my book, in this book we see that design is more than making pleasurable things or aesthetic or interesting things in this historical period in China. And we, in our book, we have seen the transformation of the birth of modern design. We want to relate it to the political development of China. And we want to see how the Chinese transformed traditional world, of course with great difficulties, to a modern one. This is my approach or interpretation to design history in China.
Thank you. Maybe could I ask you to just maybe say a couple of words about who your work and how your ideas grow out of what you do, that you're teaching and
my teaching.
Yeah, just tell everyone a little bit about just what you're doing.
what I'm doing at the School of Design?
Well, yeah, that you're there and teaching design history and other subjects.
If you ask me this question, I must confess that in Hong Kong, design history is not something that people pay too much attention. In Hong Kong, design is about designing objects. To sell in the market. It is not about reflection or it's not about seeing the development of a historical change of the material world. We don't have this kind of reflection in the educational sense. We just teach students how to make objects. And then how to make, of course, marketable objects. So, teaching design history is just something. It's just something of a very small importance in Hong Kong.
Okay, that leads us into our next panelist, and I must say I'm glad I won't be the last panelist because it'll be such a complicated situation by then. But nonetheless, that's what life is about, and that's why we get together, to make simple things complicated, to better understand. Well, it's true. I mean, to better understand them.
Actually, I'm very thankful to Empress, the Empress people, who give me this very first chance to talk about design history in Hong Kong. Okay.
So I'd like to call on Matthew. I think you may have some other things to say about the subject, and in response to Christine's posing of the problematic about Asian design.
Unlike Jockey, I don't have a book to promote.
I have exhibitions.
But he had two great catalogs that he's responsible for.
I don't even have a job, so if anyone out there is overburdened with money and they know which way to push it. I don't really even have a profession because I am not really a professional theorist. I am not really a historian. I've spent half my time in Hong Kong, half my time back in Scotland. I spent a lot of my time in fine art. I am an honorary member of fine art community or circle, but I've also spent quite a lot of time in design. I am, if anything, an interloper, making messy boundaries, making boundaries messy, I should say. So Lars said he wanted to put the spotlight on design. He certainly put the spotlight on me, and I'd ask your help to help me escape, because in the last few days I felt really like a little goldfish going around and around and around in a bowl, very nice bowl, very beautiful bowl, labeled design. But my interest is really playing with other kinds of specialists, people who really know about things. So I've just met Pili, but I didn't know you existed, and we could have had a long conversation about trade art, because in my former life I worked with Joseph Ding at the Museum of History, and we realized that Joseph's research and my research and design and his research in ink painting and trade art, we matched families together, we matched people, all of his work. We just realized, wow, it fits together, and we created an history of design in Hong Kong, but not really. It's a history of commercial practice, printmaking, photography, posters, and so on. And that was interesting. I've also worked on exhibitions on popular culture as well. We with Oscar Ho Hinke, we did an exhibition on Hong Kong 60s, and many people keep saying, when are you going to do Hong Kong 70s and Hong Kong 80s? Depends on the generation. But there, again, I wasn't really interested especially in making something about design. We were interested in lifestyle, how people use things, maybe film, maybe advertising, maybe objects, fashion, clothing, to construct a lifestyle. And now lifestyle, of course, is not just superficial. It is one of the things in the joint declaration, and it's one of the fundamentals in Hong Kong that people often feel are under threat, but at least should be preserved for the next 32 years. So I'm interested in meeting the curators for popular culture. But unfortunately, I can't meet the curator for popular culture because we don't have one. I'm interested in meeting the curator for moving image, film, photography, but not yet. So also fine art and so on. But we've just been going round and round talking about design in the spotlight. So I need your help to escape. And if you have interesting proposals about how in a I can't remember Aric's entire speech, but in a multidisciplinary framework with no boundaries, in visual culture where the categories of art, design, media, film are all dissolving in practice as well as theory, I would love your help to escape. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew, for using this platform for self-promotion. Just kidding. But I'm just curious, like just a few words. I guess how does what Christine actually said? I guess is there any similarity in the framework that you used in producing exhibitions on designing Hong Kong in the 60s or anything like that? I'm just trying to understand, like, in what ways her use of Asian design is applied or far from what you had done before.
I have worked as an exhibition designer, and in that sense, I am quite confident in trade fairs or expos or promotions of Hong Kong design under the banner or the label of Asian design. I think that is great. There's already within M+, a very large space which is going to be used for general purposes and designated as the space for creative industries. My anxiety is that the space for design and the space for Chinese art,
there is no designation of space at the moment.
So
between disciplines.
This is what I need your help for.
But that's
if I am designing trade fair or expo for Asian design, I think that's great. I don't think it has quite the same. A museum is not a trade fair. It's something else, and that's why we need more help, more dialogue rather than monologue.
All right, thank you, Matthew. I just wanted to give a chance for Kayoko and Nittve to address what you think about what Christine had to say with your approach for Kayoko in working on Project Japan and considering metabolism as the last avant-garde. What do you how do you think? What do you think of that statement or that phrase in light of what Christine is saying? Whether you agree with her or not. So.
Yeah, I try my best to fit into this context. So in response to what Christine said, I think the design, in our particular case of producing, kind of recontextualizing the history of the history of the architects who try to get together, work together to to help the country recover from the war, but also save the country from the natural disasters. As you know, that we have this ongoing kind of the wave of natural disasters attacking the country. And then so all of these efforts kind of culminated in this whole visionary drawings of metabolism, but ironically, and in a way fantastically, they kind of remembered till recently as the artistic visionary movement, and then from the West, it was recognized as the last avant-garde movement, as exactly Rem Koolhaas and Hans Sully always was motivated with. They were motivated to meet the survivors of this movement, because was the last and non-Western avant-garde movements. And also their kind of, there was this urgency of the longevity of their lives. So, that was the motivation. But then after the 5 years of work of laborious research and collecting and kind of emotional kind of the conflict and all these dramas, then we came to kind of put all of the pieces of fragments of new facts, hidden kind of truths, and the photographic, the evidences. Then we could once and for all kind of put all of the fragmented matters into one picture. In our narrative. And then understood finally, this was the design to serve the country rather than kind of artistic expression. And it was, really the representation of their effort to engage the architectural practice into the society at large. And this was what most inspired us. It was a huge kind of learning lesson from the history to the design, what design can do today.
Nittve, with regards to your exhibition on contemporary Indian design, how is the
Sure.
framework?
Yes, as Shirley said, I'm curating an exhibition on contemporary design from India and in the middle of the process for that, and that should take place at the V&A in 2015. So a lot of the issues that Christine talked about in terms of definitions of design, definitions indeed of modernity, tradition and identity are at the forefront of the exhibition and how do we deal with those issues. Now, when I was confronted with the idea with the notion of doing this exhibition, obviously, how you represent a nation has an impact on the nation you represent. So you'll have expectations from India as to how their design is going to be represented. You also have the expectations of your audience at the V&A who are used to seeing object-based exhibitions of very glamorous, beautiful things. Design in India is changing quite rapidly. It's at a period of change. We're looking at post-liberalization, increasing globalization, economic empowerment, but also economic disparity. And one of the things that what I did was let designers and academics show me where I ought to go. So these are academics in India, designers in India, and they led me to design at different levels of society, whether it's rural, semi-urban, urban, highly urban, very cosmopolitan areas. Design exists at all of those levels, and it can be object-based, it can be system-based. It's looking at things like the redesign of the census form, or it's looking at themes of recycling or improvisation. So it's a very, very, design covers a huge range of processes, objects, systems, and coming in from the outside, you have to be open to all of those and then think about how you're going to interpret them. Quite often we found that the objects and stories that we were looking at, the process was far more important than anything else. And how do you show that process? So here I'm thinking of the craftspeople based throughout rural India and the way designers work with them. This is about social empowerment and how craftspeople are empowered to become self-sufficient. So it's often the process that's quite important and something that the Western design doesn't really have to deal with or doesn't really explore. So in terms of Asian design and Indian design, it's looking at issues that aren't easy to display. How do we display some of these ideas and processes? So I don't have a kind of a way of I don't have my answer to what is Indian design or design from India, but I do have lots of interesting stories that can convey the different ideas of design that Indians themselves have told me.
Do we have time for a couple of questions?
One last question to Christine, which wasn't necessarily presented in your talk, was the notion of, as much as you've problematized it, I just wanted to hear then, how is this still a useful construct or not, basically?
Well, I think we use it as a kind of handle. We use all sorts of phrases that condense very complex ideas, even though we know that they're very unsatisfactory because we can't come up with anything better. And I think until someone comes up with something better, it's going to be out there. The other thing is that the term has a kind of history, and it's very, once a phrase is in circulation, it's very hard to get rid of it. So I think, love it or hate it, I think it's here to stay.
Is there anything constructive from it, possibly, or just
well,
helping us?
I think that if as long as people use it with an awareness of all the cultural baggage that comes with it, and understand its history, the historical implications, the geographical implications, the political implications, and also the linguistic implications. The fact that the term design is a word that comes from Italian disegno, and until the introduction of this term to China, Japan, and so forth in the 19th century, that specific term didn't exist. That doesn't mean, however, in my view, that one can't talk about design beforehand. It's simply the term needs to be qualified. So I think we need to use it, but we need to use it with a critical awareness.
Before I open it up to the public, can I just... you'd like to add? Sure.
Let me quickly respond to what Yan said about Hong Kong, about she's having a hard time, kind of very frustrating time experience here, having kind of no reaction. But, me coming from Japan, which is kind of the opposite, it is so kind of designed, everything's designed, so self-consciously designed. And in a way, I find Hong Kong situation right now, it's quite relieving. I mean, you have so much more, the freedom. And then I don't think that you need to particularly define anything as, this is the Hong Kong design, or this is the Hong Kongness. But I think that you should think of, of this kind of tabula rasa situation, and this is much more, totally different from Japan, and then you're much, you have much more probably than you think.
Just add one last point that I think there's ways of substantiating Asian design, but it takes time. We did an archive and a collection of Hong Kong for the Heritage Museum, which took us about 4 years, 50,000 objects, 5,000 object items, with about 4 or 5 people working alongside, and it cost about 2 million. That's just Hong Kong, and going up to Samsaibo is only a bus ride. To do the similar work for China would be much more expensive, much more long-term for the subcontinent, Philippines, and so on. Now, it is possible for a museum funded with the depth and expectations of M+ to engage that kind of work, but unless it can substantiate through research and collection policy Asian design, I don't think anyone will ever see Asian design as other than a convenient handle.
Yes, it's a good point. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, we have about 5 to 8 minutes for any question from the floor. So if you have anything, would you be able to raise your hand, and one of our colleagues will just give you the mic? All right.
As I was listening to Dr. Guth, is that the way to pronounce your name, talking about the need to clarify what Asian design means. In fact, as I hear you talk, I was in fact hearing wonderful opportunity for curating museum exhibitions. It would seem that that's the theme itself, what is Asian design, can open up vast opportunities for creating museum exhibitions. And you're nodding your head, so you gave me the answer already. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from somewhere? No? Okay, guess not. Yep. Yep.
I'll take it a different way. I was very impressed with your presentation, and it seemed to me that the logical implication is that we may consider abandoning the term Asian design. The connotations of neo-colonial or post-colonial are so strong that I think your argument is decisive. And why you should conclude by saying we have to live with it and it's here to stay, I'm not sure. Maybe this is the opportunity to ditch it. Maybe 20 years from now, it would be irrelevant. It would be as irrelevant to talk about Asian design as it would be to talk about French wine.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Yeah, maybe I'm too pessimistic because I'm stuck teaching Asian design. but let me sort of add something that I took out of my short remarks, and that is Asian design, for whom, by whom, and who is using this term. What's very interesting is that a great number of designers themselves are very uncomfortable with that term. I mean, you never hear a designer saying, I'm an Asian designer. Someone might say, I'm a Japanese designer, I'm a Chinese designer, but they never say, I'm an Asian designer. And it's a label that is applied from the outside. And so I think it's really important in thinking, and this is where I would agree with you, let's do away with it. I think it's extremely important to take into consideration how designers themselves feel about this. And, it would be, the basis for my comments is sort of anecdotal. I know quite a number of designers with multi-sided backgrounds and multi-sided practices whose work is carried out in multiple sites as well. And they say, no, I'm a designer.
Yeah, I'd like to add something as an historian. I'm working on a world history of design. I've been doing that for about 10 years and, of course, confronting all these questions. And the first distinction I'd like to make is between, in this subject, Asian design and design in Asia. I think Asia as a geographical place is changing, but it's more stable than the notion of Asian design. And I think we've seen historically that some of these, the attempt to create a kind of a national identity for design ends up being a sort of a myth and often a marketing tool. So the idea of Italian design was a very big thing in a certain period, and yet if you're forced to say, well, what is Italian design, you really run into problems. But it was a very useful term in promoting Italy as a center of design for a period. So as an historian, I would probably want to historicize the terms itself. I mean, always turn everything back on what actually happened and not get ourselves caught in these myths and trying to figure out what Asian design is, because I think that itself is a construct that will vary from one to another.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Matthew said substantiated through research, so yeah. But yes, thank you guys for just being here. And another question, yes.
Hi. Okay. I have two views to share. I'm going to make it short. First of all, when I hear that people in Hong Kong that's not interested in design history, I'm very uncomfortable to hear that, because as far as I know, there's a lot of people interested in the history of design, but the expression of design may not be the academic terms design, but sometimes there are some things that appears in the lifestyle, expressed in terms of something that happened in our life. And there's a lot of people researching or just for interest, researching into little items. And there's a lot of people like that around me. So if you want to know some of them, I can tell you later. Second thought, second thing, I'm telling, from the perspective of librarian in archive. And I think talking about Asia design as a big umbrella is really difficult. And I don't think that's a good place to start. Because when we talk about Asian design, actually we need the substance. What are the real content, real example that we are talking about? If you don't have example, you don't have some things that illustrate the commonality between across Asia, what kind of conclusion can you build up on? It would be some just phony bubbles in the air. So I do hope the Empress, especially if you're starting a design museum, look into the example and also collect some fact artifacts, some things that you can really look into and analyze. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Yes, taken. Point taken. I think we're time's up for the next panel. So we haven't forgotten that yet. So yes, Aric, I'll hand it over to you and your next panel.